welcome back. I'm really glad you joined us this week. The letter I'm looking at this week is from a lady who goes by the initial B, and the topic of her letter is emotions, which makes me want to sing a Mariah Carey song from the 90s. But I won't, because I don't want you to lose your hearing. You're welcome. Okay, so let me get started. B writes, "Dear Natalie, I am your typical postmenopausal emotional sponge." I really thought I was going to be able to read that line without laughing, but it's just so good. B, gosh, that's the best first sentence of any letter I've ever gotten. Okay, allow me to carry on. B writes, "I cry at the drop of a hat. Happy crying, sad crying, you name it, I'll cry for it. I'm getting ready to leave on an adventure to Mexico. I've been going twice a year for the past 6 years, and each time I go, I see the same show. It's a history of Mexico and its culture, and every time I see it, I'm a wreck. Not a tear running down the cheek, but full-on red-nosed weeping. It's so very beautiful. Just talking about it now has gotten me started. So I'll be there in just a few days, sitting in that same show. Can you give me some advice for keeping my emotions in check so I'm not a total embarrassment to myself and my travel companion?" So I gotta tell you, right out the gate, my first thought is that B has a beautiful gift. I know that many of us here in Western cultures, at least, have this idea that strong displays of emotion are bad. They somehow denote weakness or vulnerability, or a person with strong emotions isn't trustworthy or is an embarrassment. But I don't think that's true. And in fact, if you were to talk to your closest friends and family, many of them would argue against that too. So I'm not really sure how that cultural relic continues to exist, because most of us don't buy into it. In fact, strong, intense emotional displays show that you're living life fully, that you're able to experience the whole breadth and height and depth of an experience, and you're not holding back, and you're not repressed and restrained. And so I think in that sense, B has this really wonderful gift to fully experience things, and when something's beauty moves her, she feels it. I think that's a beautiful thing. But with that said, there's certainly times when really strong emotional expression would work against our goals, right? So B crying because she's moved in a beautiful play is very different than B thinking about that play during a business proposal meeting and sobbing while she's pitching a new deal, right? So we have to develop some basic skills to keep our emotions in check when they will work against us if we were to fully experience them. And for that, I turn to a little something called emotion regulation. Yeah, go figure. The name, I mean, it's really vague, right? Emotion regulation. But seriously, emotion regulation is a subset of a very specific type of therapy called dialectical behavior therapy. And this is a type of therapy that's normally geared toward folks who have really strong, significant problems with their emotions that impacts their behavior, usually in a pretty harmful way, and it keeps them from enjoying the types of relationships they want to have. So I'm obviously not going to be advocating the really intensive skills that this type of therapy offers, but rather a simpler, more basic, very flexible form of emotion regulation that anybody can use, regardless of your mental health status. It's a tool that can be used every day. So the very first step is to recognize that emotions are simply messages. They're not something that we need to immediately act upon. So if we think of emotions as not states of being, but rather mail, a letter. If we think of emotions as a letter that shows up and gives us a message about how we're interacting with whatever we're experiencing, it sort of offers us a little bit more control over the experience. So rather than "I am happy," I can think I received this message that whatever is happening right now is happy. I am glad about it. Yay, right? So emotions aren't states of being. Rather, they're letters giving us messages about how we're experiencing whatever's going on at that moment. So with that said, we don't have to act on emotions because they're just messages, right? So when I'm feeling a really intense emotion that I deem negative, I don't have to cry, I don't have to curse, I don't have to throw a brick through a bakery window, because pastries don't deserve that kind of treatment. But I don't have to do anything, right? I just have to know, like, yo, I'm having this interaction with what's going on right now, and it kind of sucks. And that's it. So let's start there with this idea that emotions are just neutral and we don't have to act on them immediately. We do, however, have to go back to them. We can't ignore them forever, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. So once we have this first step down, the next step is to get really good at identifying our emotions. And quite frankly, most of us are pretty bad at this. You ask someone how they're doing, and they usually say something along the lines of like, I'm fine, I'm great, I'm good, just dandy. What does any of that mean? Like, emotionally, what is just fine? It's nothing. It's sort of a worthless, canned response, right? So a lot of us don't get in the habit of identifying what our emotional experience is. And that stinks, because it's really hard to regulate something when you don't even know what you're regulating. So I encourage folks to get in the habit of truly identifying their emotional state. So the emotion I'm experiencing right now is happiness, joy, enthusiasm, excitement, anticipation, whatever, love, infatuation. You get the idea. Or the emotional state I'm experiencing right now is anger, frustration, disappointment, fear, whatever the case may be. Get really specific, really pinpoint, especially when the emotional experience is intense. Really pinpoint what your emotion is. So that's the second step. Get in the habit of doing that regularly. Even if it's just, throughout the day. You're at lunch, you're eating your lunch. Take a moment to say, oh, right now I'm feeling content. Right now I'm feeling annoyed that Sharon keeps bringing up the stupid work gathering that I don't want to go to, and she's making me bring the bagels, and I don't even like bagels. Why does Sharon always do that? Just kidding. I don't even know anybody named Sharon. Anyway, so those are the first two steps. And the third step is to allow yourself to feel the emotion when it's safe, when it's effective, and when it makes sense to do so. So earlier in this episode, I gave this example of, B doesn't want to cry at the thought of this play when she's pitching a new business idea. However, when she gets back to her car after pitching the business idea, she might decide that's the time. She doesn't have to drive away right away. She can sit in her car and think about this beautiful play, and she can shed a few tears and feel the joy and the beauty that she appreciates so much about the play. It's really important for her to do this. It's really important for all of us to do this. When we experience a really strong emotional reaction, we can shelve it for a minute. After all, it's not good or bad. It's just a message. We don't have to respond to every message we get immediately, whether it's email, snail mail, voicemail, or emotional mail, right? We don't have to do anything with it right away. But just like regular mail, if we don't respond to emotional mail, eventually it's going to build up. And oftentimes when mail builds up, we get ourselves into a lot of doo-doo, right? We have back bills we have to pay, and, a bunch of cards that we never responded to, and it's messy. So you want to make sure that you go into a safe place eventually and allow yourself to really feel the emotion. A lot of us are under the misconception that if we simply ignore the emotion, we get through that initial I'm feeling a strong emotion, and then we think we're done, and we never revisit the emotion, and we think it's fine. But in addition to building up in an unhealthy way, it also doesn't really teach us how to live through the emotion when it happens again. And as basic as this may sound, the easiest way through an emotion is through it. If you imagine emotional experience as sort of a freight train going through a tunnel, you could try to go over it or under it or around it, but the quickest and most expedient and most efficient and most effective way to get through that tunnel is through it, right? To get over that mountain is through the tunnel. So when we start doing this, it gets easier and easier. So you want to go back, you want to revisit the emotion, you want to let yourself experience it because you're sort of inoculating yourself against it in the future. And you'll notice that over time it becomes easier and more straightforward to get through the emotion each time you experience it again. And then the very last step, once you've done all these steps so far, is to engage in some counter conditioning. And that is way too in-depth to get into in this episode. But the main idea is to do some techniques that work against the emotion, maybe by replacing the emotional message with one that is a little bit easier to deal with, or by doing a behavior that causes you to feel a different emotion. So some examples of this are, deep breathing, meditation type exercises, something called opposite action. So if I'm feeling angry and there's this idea in my head that I'm going to respond to this message of anger by punching someone in the face, maybe instead I do an opposite action. I go and give somebody a hug, or I say a nice compliment to somebody instead. So there's a lot of different ways. There will be links below this video to various resources on counter conditioning techniques. But the idea is this isn't just a one-time thing. It's not just like, hey, do this one thing when you're experiencing an intense emotion and it'll go away and you'll be cool. Because first of all, you're cool no matter what. And secondly, it's a state of being. It's a way to be in the world, and it takes practice, and it's a process. And so I hope that you'll find this little video helpful, and that you'll try the process out, even if you're not somebody who has really intense emotional experiences, even if you're somebody who doesn't like Mariah Carey. See you next week. Bye.